I know a dentist that makes $800,000 a year, but he spends every dollar that he makes. Look, I'm a dentist too, but the reality is there are a lot of things I would rather do than just see patients every day. And if you spend every single dollar you make, that's all you're ever going to be able to do. Being a dentist is an incredible job. You can make a lot of money in a short amount of time. And if you want to set up your life in a way that gives you freedom to do other things than just do dentistry all the time, it's possible. So for instance, with me, I'm also a musician, and last year I was able to take off a lot of time from work because I got some jobs as a composer working for a company that's making music for movie trailers. I got to work with Netflix, Warner Brothers, Paramount Pictures. It's been a blast. I didn't make a huge amount of money from the work that I did on these movie trailers. I think I made like 30 to 40,000, but because I've set up my life this way, I'm able to make some of these types of decisions. Right now, I'm currently investigating the idea of taking 2 to 3 months off next year to go to Japan with my family. So first off, it's obvious, but you need to make more money than you spend. During my first year out of school, I graduated in May, and it took me a couple months to get my license. So I only worked like 4 to 5 months my first year, and I made about $70,000, but I only spent $31,000 that year. So I ended up, even that first year, saving $38,000. It's super easy to make more money than you spend as a dentist in the United States. My second year out of school was when I bought my first dental practice, and I only owned that practice for about a year because we decided we wanted to move. So during the time that I owned that office, I made $400,000 from production before paying taxes, but that's after all the business expenses like paying off the practice loan and paying employees, etc. Then when I sold the business, I actually was able to sell it for about $300,000 more than I paid for it. So in total that year, I made $700,000. But between my wife and I, we spent $101,000 that year. So we weren't living frugally. We actually took 2.5 weeks off at one point, and we went to Egypt, and we stayed at a hotel overlooking the pyramids. We also went on a cruise around Europe. And I think I built a gaming PC for like $3,000 during that year. So I'm not saying you can't spend money on things that are important to you. We were living in an inexpensive, very modest apartment, and I was driving a 2005 Honda Civic. There was no reason for me to buy a brand new car right after getting out from school. It just wasn't important to me. So income of $700,000, expenses of $100,000, and then I had to pay taxes of $150,000. So in total, I was able to save $450,000 my second year out of school. So the first step to financial independence as a dentist is you just need to find a way to make a lot of money. The easiest way to be financially independent as a dentist is to make more money. You're not going to get rich because you skipped going to Starbucks or you canceled your Netflix subscription. If you are a dentist in the United States making less than $250,000 a year, then you just need to find a better job. You need to find a way to make a lot more money. And there's really 2 ways to do that. And that's see a lot more patients or become an owner and keep a much higher percentage of the money that you produce. If you're working as an associate dentist, you're probably keeping something like 30% of your production. But when you own a dental practice, you can keep anywhere from 60 to 100% of your production as profit. So you might be saying, how are you keeping 100% of your production as profit when you have expenses? When you are working as an associate, you don't get any of the cut from the work that the other people in the office do. But when you own the business, any work that's done in that office, you get to keep a percentage of. It is entirely possible and 100% realistic to set your dental practice up in a way in which your hygiene department or maybe an associate dentist are covering 100% of the expenses of your practice so that every single procedure that you do on patients is 100% profit to your pocket. This is just the kind of thing that you cannot do when you're working as an associate dentist. So now you're doing the same exact crown, but instead of keeping 30% of that production, you're keeping 70, 80, 90, 100% of that production. That's 2 to 3 times as much money that you're making by doing the same exact procedure when you own your own practice. And also another thing you can do when you're an owner, maybe you decide that you don't need to make $500,000 a year. You're happy with $250,000 a year. Well, then you can just work half as much. Instead of working 5 days a week and making $500,000, just work 2.5 days and make $250,000. You can live a great life with $250,000 a year. Plenty to spend and still save, and you're just working 2.5 days a week. I know multiple dentists that have followed this strategy, and I think it's perfectly acceptable. I would like to see someone who's an associate dentist making $250,000 a year while working 2.5 days a week. If you exist, please email me and leave a comment. I'd like to know about it. Maybe 1 or 2 people have figured that out, but the reality is if you want that kind of lifestyle, you're probably going to need to own your own practice. So next, let's talk about spending. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I personally know a dentist who's making $800,000 a year but has $0 in his bank account. No matter how much money you make, it's possible to spend it. One of the biggest risks for dentists is lifestyle inflation. I know a dentist who, while he was in dental school, bought a brand new, really expensive new car. He was a dental student. He didn't have any money. He just had to finance 100% of that purchase. And I think he didn't have to make a payment for the first year or something. And so that's how he was able to buy it before even graduating. I don't know what kind of interest he was paying on that. It was probably something ridiculous. I know a lot of dentists who feel pressured, like they have to buy a super expensive house and a super expensive car because they're a dentist. They think that if they don't buy the expensive house and the expensive car, that people are going to think that they're a failure. Stop caring about what other people think. The reality is most people are not thinking about you anyways. They're too busy worried about themselves. If buying a brand new expensive car is important to you, then luckily as a dentist, you're going to be making enough money to where you're going to be able to do that. But if it's not important to you, then don't waste the money on it. Spend the money on something else that actually brings you happiness. Like for me, I'd much rather spend that money traveling to an interesting place or buying some cool electronic device or something. There's 2 different categories of expenses that you're going to want to worry about. When you're making $400,000 or $500,000 a year, you don't need to worry about how much money you're spending on a coffee or how much money you're spending on groceries. You got to worry about the big expenses. The number 1 expense is the house that you live in. No matter how much money you have, there's always going to be houses that are outside of your price range. I literally do not understand why so many dentists feel that they have to buy that 5,000 square foot McMansion house. Like, what are they doing? Are they running laps in their house? Just go outside and go to the park to go on a run. The only reason they're doing it is because they want to impress their friends. They want to show off to their family how successful they are in their business. Nobody cares how big your house is. I was talking to someone who has one of these big houses with like 9 bathrooms in it, and they were complaining about, oh, it takes so long to clean out my bathrooms. That's why I have to hire a cleaning service to come help me clean my bathrooms. Or you just don't buy such a big house and then you don't have so many bathrooms to clean. You ever think about that? Worst case scenario, you have a family of 4 people and everyone just has to use the bathroom at the same exact time. Well, then you only need 4 bathrooms and some of those can be half baths. But guess what? In real life, you can just wait until the other person finishes. You only need 1 bathroom. Other examples of big expenses are buying unnecessarily expensive cars and then financing them. If you do not have the cash to buy that car, then don't buy it. If you are a dentist, you do not need an $80,000 pickup truck. If you want it and you have the cash to pay for it, then great. But if you don't, do not finance a $80,000 pickup truck. You don't need to eat at super expensive restaurants 5 times a week. You don't need to go on an expensive vacation every month. And if you don't have the money, you don't need to sign up for some expensive country club to go golfing or play tennis. Once again, if you have the money, you can buy basically anything you want as a dentist. But you just need to think about every dollar that you're spending on this stuff is money that you're not saving, and that just means you're going to be spending that much more time in the clinic working on patients. If you are a dentist in the United States, there is absolutely no reason that you should have to take out debt to finance anything other than your education and buying a dental practice. Taking out student loans to become a dentist and taking out a practice loan to become a practice owner, those are decisions that are going to greatly increase your income making potential into the future. So those are worth it. But basically anything else you spend money on is not going to help you out at all. The only other exception is maybe a mortgage. 5 or 6 years ago, you could get a mortgage for like 2 to 3% interest, but at least right now at the time of this video, the interest rates are much higher than that. If you are a dentist, just save up some money and you can just buy a house. As long as you don't have to have that giant 5,000 square foot McMansion. If you make $400,000 a year and you're spending $100,000 a year, you just have to save money up for 2 years and you can buy a $600,000 house in cash. I bought my house 100% in cash, no mortgage. If I would have been able to get like a 2% interest rate, then I probably would have taken out a mortgage just for the financial arbitrage opportunities. But at the time, the best I was going to be able to get was 7%. And so I was like, screw that. I'm just going to buy this thing in cash. When you are a dentist and you have the potential to be making $500,000 a year plus, you're allowed to think about money a little bit differently than the average person. So next is saving and investing. If you are consistently making more money than you're spending, you're going to have money left over. What are you going to do with this money that you have left over? So the first thing you're going to want to do is set up an emergency fund. There are two purposes for this emergency fund. The number one reason is if for whatever reason you lose your job or you just decide to take some time off work or whatever, you have some savings lined up that you're going to be able to cover your living expenses. The second reason as a dentist to have an emergency fund is when you buy a dental practice, the banks are going to expect that you have $50,000 to $75,000 saved up in your bank account because they want to know that if there is a transition period where you're going from being an associate to being the owner, that you're going to be able to cover your expenses during that time. And so for both of those reasons, you want to make sure that you save up some money in an emergency fund. The next way that you want to be investing your money as a dentist is in a dental practice. Putting your money into a dental practice is potentially going to give you exponentially higher returns than any other investment that you're going to make. The reason why you're able to make so much more money investing into a dental practice is because legally only dentists are allowed to own dental practices. Of course, there are corporations like Aspen and Heartland and Pacific that have kind of figured ways around this. But the reason that they're doing that, even though it's extremely difficult and hard work for them to do so, is because how profitable it is. When you own a dental practice, you're later going to be able to sell it at a profit. And the same goes if you own the real estate of the building that you're working in, you're eventually going to later be able to sell that. So literally, when you are paying off a practice loan, it's the same as investing money into a retirement fund. But there's a lot more advantages to owning a practice than putting money into a retirement fund. You can sell your practice long before you're 68 years old and cash in on that money sooner if you want. So next is going to be you want to pay off any debt that you have. Obviously, if you have any credit card debt or any high interest debt, you have to pay that off right away. Like as a dentist, you should never have credit card debt. The only exception to this is your student loans. I don't have time to get into it right now, but there are so many strategies for student loans. For me personally, I currently have my student loans on income-based repayment. And because when you buy and sell dental practices, there's various things you can do with assets on your tax forms. I currently have a $0 per month payment on my student loans. And right now, my student loans are on the SAVE plan, which might go away depending on politically what happens. I'll probably eventually end up paying my student loans off. Like I could afford to pay them off, but right now, from a strategy point of view, it doesn't make sense for me. So finally, after you have your emergency plan, you've bought a practice and you've paid off your loans, then you want to start looking into retirement accounts. There are all sorts of retirement account strategies you can follow. For me personally, I have 4 different retirement accounts that I'm putting money into: a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, an HSA, and a 401k. Of course, all the different accounts are going to have different advantages and disadvantages. I recommend reading up on that. If you have an accountant, talk to your accountant about it. If you're a dentist, you probably are going to have enough money to max out all those accounts. Especially if you're younger and you have plenty of time for your money to be in the market, you're probably just going to want to put that money into a low fee index fund. The most common one is the S&P 500, which is an index of the top 500 companies in the United States. As you get closer to retiring, you're probably going to want to diversify a little bit more because you don't want the market to be down when you take money out of your account. And then once you've maxed out all those retirement accounts, you can also just put some money in a brokerage account. That's your last resort because you're going to have to pay a lot more taxes on that versus the retirement accounts. Next thing to do if you want financial freedom is you're going to want to make sure that you're protecting yourself from losing your money. You want to make sure that you have the proper liability and malpractice insurance. When you actually go to buy a dental practice, the banks, they're going to require you to have various types of insurance. So they're going to help you decide exactly what you need. Obviously, you want to have health insurance. As a dentist, you're going to be paying for your own health insurance. Personally, I just bought the highest deductible plan that was available on healthcare.gov so that if there's some sort of car wreck or some sort of emergency, the maximum I'm going to lose is like $15,000 rather than $500,000. If you have some sort of health condition and are going to be using your insurance a lot, maybe you want a lower deductible. Then the other thing I'm going to put in this section is taking care of your mental health. Dentistry is a really, really, really stressful job. A lot of dentists get burnt out. I personally would not work more than 4 days a week. When I first started out, there were some times that I worked 6 days a week, and it just wasn't worth it. Limit yourself to 4 days a week. If you get burnt out and don't want to do this anymore, then that's going to be by far the most expensive thing that could happen to you, because as a dentist, there's really not that many other jobs you can do. Make sure you have family and friends and hobbies and other things you're doing other than just seeing patients. Finally, let's look at some tactical ways you can take time off if you are a dental practice owner. The obvious thing you can do is hire an associate to work at your practice. If you set your business up so that there's an associate that's there seeing patients and covering hygiene checks, you can take a month, 2 months off, and the associate just watches the office while you're gone. Now, if your practice isn't big enough to hire an associate, or you just don't want to hire an associate, which I completely understand, I don't really like managing employees either. So if you don't want to have to manage an associate, you don't have to. You can hire a temp dentist or multiple temp dentists to come and see patients in your office when you're gone. I have personally worked in offices as a temp dentist filling in for other dentists. There are recruiting companies that you can reach out to that will hire people to come in and fill in the office when you're gone. So don't think that once you become a practice owner, you no longer have freedom. There's multiple options of things you can do. You don't have to be at retirement age to sell your practice. I know some dentists in their career who own 4 to 5 different practices. They sell one and then they take some time off and then they go buy another practice somewhere else. If you're smart about it, you're buying less expensive practices and you're growing them up before you sell them, and then you walk away with this big profit. I'm not saying you have to do this to make money as a dentist, but it is a possibility if after working at an office for a certain amount of time, you decide you want some time off. It's an option. And lastly, I want to share a few thoughts on retirement. I know someone who worked extremely hard and saved up a lot of money and then retired early. But once the person actually retired, they were super bored and started to get depressed because they didn't have anything to do. Work is such a huge aspect of your purpose and identity as a citizen in our society. Work is simply a way to provide value to other people, and the money that you receive is simply a measure of how much value you've provided to society. Do you really ever want to stop providing value to other people? Ultimately, providing value to other people is what makes life meaningful. I personally don't ever want to completely retire. I'm not going to be working full-time seeing patients until the day I die, but I never want to fully retire. Having financial freedom is about having options, not trying to escape from a life that you don't like. It's the freedom to choose how and where you want to spend your time. It's about designing a life that is enjoyable and meaningful, not a life that you feel like you need to escape from.